After buying the property and repairing the Kuda first thing, we were pretty strapped, so for the first few years, all we could really do was clean and throw away old items that we no longer felt were necessary. The living room floor was the very first internal project we undertook. The floor was completely unsafe. You often risked falling through it in several places, so we tore it out, put down a water vapor barrier, added new joists, then put in 3 centimeter thick plywood, and then 3 centimeter thick cedar planking. It completely transformed the floor. We added a bit of stone for where we were going to have the wood stove, but other than that, it created this beautiful, warm, safe, very soundproof, very insulated flooring option, and it completely changed the living room into probably our preferred space in the whole house. And we moved on to the kitchen. The kitchen required a lot of demolition. It was grim, dirty work, but I'm glad it's done. We had a chance to go up into the space above the ceiling and see paw prints from the various animals that had lived there. Also, the generations of dust and dirt and the sketchy wiring that had been in place since Lord knows when. Unfortunately, we also discovered that one of the major beams in the house had been damaged by termites, so that required me to cut out the section that had been damaged and then create a series of mortises that allowed all the existing beams to tie into it. I wasn't overly familiar with some of the Japanese joinery techniques, so I did the best that I could and did it pretty much all by hand, as you can see. And then I had to go into the house and cut out the old section, which meant that I needed to support the kitchen ceiling with a series of straps. A bit sketchy, cut it all out, and then once it was out, I was able to remove the damaged section and then shape the receiving ends on each side that were still sound and prepare to put the beam, the new beam, into place. It was a little bit sketchy. Actually, it was pretty sketchy. Kimberly would say it was very sketchy, but it went without incident anyway. And although I was new to this kind of work, I was pretty happy with what I was able to come up with on my own. If I were to do it again, I'd probably do it quite differently now, but it's been in place about 8 years and it has not shown any sign of moving even during earthquakes. It's since been faced with wood on 3 sides, tying it even further together, but I'm quite pleased with it. After that was done, it was time to move on to other areas of the kitchen, specifically looking at the beams in the living room and the kitchen. And I decided to take out the ceiling planks, but that meant that I needed to wall off above the kitchen. And at the same time, I thought I was going to open a hole into the second floor, allowing the office to look down into the living room. We both liked the look from the second floor down into the living room. It did mean, though, that there was a gap that was going to need to be addressed in future. I went back to working on the kitchen ceiling. Having taken off all the planks above the living room, all I needed to do was replace these planks in the ceiling above the kitchen, and that meant using some simple half laps to prevent any change in width over the seasons, making visible gaps. And I also took this opportunity to swap out the lighting from some old weird fluorescent unit to some lovely units I got from a shipbreaker out of Mumbai. These are old maritime brass and copper lamps. With that, the kitchen was coming together. I was able to reuse old tansu, or cabinets with glass faces that we had in the house, which I really liked, turned one of them into a cabinet by backing them onto each other. And overall, the kitchen was radically different than when we moved in. So now it was time to seal off the space above the kitchen. And that required me using 2x4s to create a frame, which I could then fill with insulation and then face with drywall. The drywall needed to be matched to the profile of the beams, the contours, and that was not particularly easy. I wound up using a form of templates, basically using cardboard, as you can see here, to transfer the shapes onto the drywall, which I then put in. I am not a fan of drywall, but once it's done, and I was able to render it and close it off completely, aside from a door which I left open for access. Koa really appreciated the new explorations that were available to him as a result of having the beams open. Kimberly and I were less than thrilled, but he was quite happy. I then turned my attention to the railing needed between the second floor and the first floor. I found some on property and cut it down, reshaped it, refinished it, and then created a frame, including a ranma that I picked up in Kyoto. It really changed the feel of both the living room and the second floor. And then I turned my attention to the windows you can see that had been once completely open to the elements, allowing animals in by glassing them off. I then added lighting inside the tansu. At first, I used some incandescents and ceramic bases, but as you'll see later, I changed that out. Then it was time to address the kitchen flooring, which meant I needed to move the oven that I had put in not that long ago. 2 steps forward, 1 step back. But I put the same 3 centimeter thick planking in the kitchen, shaped it all out, and as a result, the kitchen floor was now complete. And it tied it in with the living room rather nicely. So that was the kitchen, not completely done. There's still more to do now, but certainly a far cry from where it was and very pleasant to use. The next improvement for the kitchen was to replace or to make a countertop. Before, I just had a piece of wood stacked on top of some of the cabinets. My school had undergone a renovation and they were discarding this massive keaki beam, a Japanese elm. So I hired a truck. I said I would happily take the wood, brought it back up to the farmhouse, and then cut it down, put in some bow ties to keep it from splitting. And lo and behold, we now have a complete heavy-duty countertop on top of the tansu. And while I was at it, I changed out the lighting for the incandescent to LED strips, which were far less glaring than the originals. And at the same time, I found this really neat little tansu that managed to perfectly fit our microwave oven. While I was working on the countertop, I also decided to put some bow ties into our dining room table or living room table to prevent checking from spreading any further. It's a very old table that I first built in Hawaii and it's been with us ever since. And of course, as soon as I was done, Koa decided, yes, this is a good place. I shall claim it for my own. I guess this is as good a place as any to point out that having these guys has really made a huge difference in our enjoyment of the property. We really miss them now that they're both gone. They forced us to take a break, to slow down, give them attention every day, many times throughout the day. And as a result, I think our overall experience has been a lot more enriched than it would have been without them. I miss them. It was time to move on to other projects. The lighting was coming along, but I was looking at insulation, both in the ceiling and, of course, in the doors and windows. Unfortunately, although the old houses are very atmospheric, they're also very cold, very drafty, and noisy. Each of these little panes would rattle crazily in the slightest breeze, waking us up throughout the night. Also, it would let in bugs, let in cold breezes, making the floor an absolute freezer zone, even with the insulation. It made a big difference to have the floor insulated, but it didn't stop the breezes from coming through. As you can see from these images, these doors and windows had seen better days. They had the original brass runners. They had been worn through hundreds of years of footsteps. The joints, although sound, were not as sound as they should be, and they certainly weren't secure. So it was time to bring in a crane to lift some of the heavier items. But a lot of it, honestly, was just people power. Me and some friends lifting them into place. And then while they were held in place, I would secure them. Looking at this now, looking at what the house looked like before and what it looks like now, it's a huge change. And I can't say that it's all for the better because it definitely lost some of that period charm that it once had. However, when I think about actual livability, when I think about the views that are now possible out of the glass, and when I then consider what a difference just adding these made for the warmth or the coolness of the house, depending on the season, I certainly don't regret it at all. It was probably the single most expensive job we ever did on the house, and I hope it remains the single most expensive job we ever do. But I would definitely do it again. And I think if you do purchase a house like this, you'd be well advised to consider spending your money here as we did on the doors and windows, because it makes it from a historical piece into a proper home. I then turned my attention to the remaining floors. There were 2 rooms, one for Kimberly's office, although we were using it as a dining room at the time. Then the main washitsu, where we had the tokonoma. The bedrooms all had tatami, and the tatami were all in very, very bad shape. There was no way we could save them. They had dani, and the dust was insane. So we decided that we would refloor most of them with plywood and then the same cedar that I used in the living room, but we would keep some of them as tatami. Same procedure as last time. You can see that I, wherever possible, would tie in the new floor joists to existing beams below the floor, and also kept the horigotatsu frame, as you can see, and built around it. So same process as last time, assuring everything is level and true, putting in plenty of floor jacks to support them, and then popping in insulation, facing with 3 centimeter plywood, and then with the 3 centimeter thick cedar planks. With the horikotatsu room, there was one additional issue, and that was the horikotatsu. So it was built to be somewhat proud of the tatami mats, but I didn't want it to be proud of the floor because I wanted to be able to use our zaisu, which are low Japanese chairs which sit directly on the floor. And if there was a lip, then it would stop that from working. So out came the chisel and the hand planes, and I brought it down, which then allowed me to rebuild it from the ground up. I've also been doing in-floor outlets instead of external. So with Minka, because they are single wall construction, you can't hide the wires. But if you run them under the floor and use these lovely brass units made by Panasonic, they make an excellent hidden option. All the planks are glued and screwed. And of course, then they're finished with the shibugaki stain, which is a natural stain. And over time, it darkens to a beautiful reddish hue, as you can see here. Again, looking at the flooring, you can see how it unifies the house to have everything basically in one orientation and using the same materials. It also makes the rooms feel quite open when we slide the shoji or the fusuma out. With so much of the hard work done, the floors, the walls, the glass, and everything, we could begin putting our attention a little bit to what the house would look like in terms of furnishings and finishings. So one of the things that we splurged on were very high quality fusuma panels. Now, fusuma are sliding doors in Japanese houses, and they are one of the few areas that you'll often see art as architecture, if you will. And what that would allow is for us to choose patterns that we felt would suit the room well. In addition to the fusuma, I was able to score this lovely carpet from India. A friend of ours was working in India at the time and acted as a go-between, and I absolutely love it. It also helps the audio room with the early reflections, taming them. The last room for me to tackle, as far as main living spaces, was the washitsu. And I struggled for a little bit thinking about how I wanted to tackle this because I wanted to be sure, since we were going to keep tatami in this room, that it breathed, that it would not become stagnant air because the humidity would destroy the tatami. And if you have polyurethane or any other sort of foam insulation, it acts as a moisture trap, of course. So my solution was to create a flooring pattern that had grooves and gaps running the entire length, and then a space between the insulation and the tatami itself. We brought in a professional tatami mat specialist, of course, and he did amazing work. He did everything entirely from all domestic materials, which is quite rare these days. The straw, for example, comes down in from Kyushu, and found out that the house actually had different sized tatami mats. Upstairs, they had Kyoto size, and downstairs had Tokyo size for whatever reason. While he was doing that, I was working on our master bedroom, including lining out the closet with cedar. And while the craftsman was working on the tatami, we also asked him to do the repapering for the fusuma. There are many different styles of fusuma. Ours are called hon fusuma or hon busuma because they are the proper original true dimensions rather than modern style, which are smaller. You could choose plain paper. You can choose different forms of textured paper. We chose to have art on the doors, all nature motifs, whether they be trees or birds or whatnot. And we're really, really happy we did that. There aren't a lot of areas on the house where you have wall space to hang art, and therefore the fusuma actually become a statement piece in each of the room that they occupy. In addition to the actual art on the fusuma, there are the pulls, which are original to the house and are made of brass. He cleaned them for us as he put them in. Kimberly and I also spent a lot of time cleaning the ceilings. The ceilings had become really terribly stained from urine and water over the years. And so we spent many a day with buckets basically washing down and de-staining the ceiling panels, which are all original and giant pieces of wood. Once that was done, it was time to true up a few areas of the floor that needed attention in Kimberly's office, and then we could put everything back together. You can see the little muha prints up above, and finished off a nice oil coat on these really broad ceiling panels. It's a really neat office for Kimberly, and it looks out onto the garden. We decided that we wanted a second restroom in the house, especially when you have guests over. It's nice to have two toilets for people to use. There was a room in the back we were going to use as a walk-in closet, but we decided to turn it into a utility space or utility room. So we moved the washing machine and added a second toilet. But to do that, I had to bring the floor back into level. It was as much as a centimeter every meter, which is a lot to account for. The house had subsided. While I was doing that, I started putting all the insulation up above the ceilings and running new electricals to power the new lights. I went with a very slimline light because that room is rather low ceilinged. Putting in the insulation wasn't overly difficult. It wasn't as bad as I remember back in New York, where in the 70s, the insulation would make you itch endlessly for weeks, it seemed. So that was nice, and I was very happy to both hear the sound deadening and feel a difference in the room temperature. And then I began building wainscoting from basically stock wood that I had picked up. Again, it's figured cedar, and then began putting in clear cedar for the roof pieces or the ceiling pieces. A lot of odd cuts needed to fit in these very oddly shaped spaces. Had to cut things to fit around posts and also make custom lamp supports. So you can see here working around these beams, running the wires, building in the supports, and then installing the lamps. It's by no means a glamorous bathroom with the washing machine right next to you, but it's functional. And I was able to install nice towel heating racks, which are a nice thing in winter, as I began putting in new clear cedar on the walls. Then I turned my attention back to the living room. Again, I had wanted to put insulation up above, but because it's all open, that meant I would have to put insulation in between the rafters and then seal them with some sort of planks. I chose to use planks from Oita Prefecture. These are exceptionally clear, high-grade cedar planks that were custom milled for us, and they came with tongue and groove pre-formed in the boards, which made it really nice for installation. Because I was up 2.5 stories, almost 3 stories up, on top of a ladder with a pneumatic gun, putting in these planks and then trimming everything off. It changed the look of the house significantly. Before, the rafters had this very rustic look, but now the difference in temperature is amazing. I knew it would be pretty significant, but I wasn't prepared for how significant it is. That insulation has both dampened sound and evened out temperature, and I just think it really sets off the beams. We cleaned all the beams and restained them so that they really popped in contrast to the ceiling planks that I had put in. It's neat at night with all the different lights that we've installed to see how the beams look and show off in the living room. You don't see them anywhere else in the house, really. So it's the one area where you can really see the bones of the house, and I'm very glad that we did it, even though keeping a double height area can be challenging in terms of heat, even with the insulation. Not bad though, better than I thought it would be. And that's it. So now you see what the house looks like after 10 years of steady progress. We've begun rearranging and putting things where we think they might be best, but that's always a work in progress. And it's really cool to see how the pieces sit within their rooms and sort of bring the rooms to life. Some pieces came with the house, other pieces we had purchased while we were in Fukuoka, and others we've purchased since being here. But essentially, they all are probably from the Showa era. There are a couple that are original that came with the house that might be all the way back to the Meiji. They need a fair bit of work though, so I haven't put them out yet. One final furnishing that we received was this set of armor from Kimberly's uncle. It's a very special gift, and it has place of pride in the upstairs guest bedroom. I really like how it plays off the scrolls and the color.